So maybe we can go and get started. Everyone else who joins us can just file on in. Want to welcome everyone to the second event. We're very excited to have everyone for the Brehm-Boucher speaker series, Making Policy in an Uncertain World. So I'm here to introduce the speaker series, but I want to introduce Ms. Carolyn Brehm, Board of Governor, former alum, to talk about their speaker series. So Carolyn?
Thank you, Chris. Thanks so much, everyone. Welcome to the second in our series of 6 distinguished practitioners in the field of diplomacy, national security and intelligence, and global business to talk about their stories, their personal stories and their journey as they've navigated uncertainty with agility and success, which seems like it's a very pertinent example in this world we live in right now, where it seems like every day is a little bit different, and it's all testing our ability to stay focused on what we need to. Delighted to have a member of the national security and intelligence community joining us today. I think it's going to be a really interesting discussion. And I just want to say thank you to our partners at University of New Haven, Professor Chris Haynes and Professor Matt Schmidt. Richard and I really are having a fabulous time with this partnership and look forward to our sessions between now and November when we close out the first online portion. And with the hope that one of these days we can do this on campus, face to face.
Absolutely. So thank you very much, Carolyn. Appreciate it. And next, introduce our guest speaker is our International Affairs Coordinator, Dr. Matthew Schmidt. Matt?
Thank you, everybody. Again, oh, sorry, hold on. I hear a 4-year-old coming up here. Hey, buddy. I think we're okay. Excuse me. It is my pleasure to introduce to you Lieutenant Colonel Ryan Bulger. I had the honor of working with Ryan at the School of Advanced Military Studies back in Leavenworth, Kansas, and they both let us out at some point, and I decided to come here instead. Ryan really epitomizes the motto of the School of the Advanced Military Studies, which is the mind is the key to victory. So we're very excited to have him here, and he was also sort of one of the inspirations for the framing of the speaker series, because what Ryan has done as a military planner is to work really hard to think about and structure uncertainty so that planning can go forward, even as things don't go according to plan. Lieutenant Colonel Bulger currently serves as the commander of the 1st Squadron, 3rd Cavalry Regiment. He is a career infantry officer. He has served in both light and striker infantry organizations. He has also served at multiple strategic headquarters, most recently where he was a planner, the lead planner for Operation Inherent Resolve for U.S. CENTCOM. CENTCOM is the command for the Middle East, Central Command. He was in the Joint Operations Division there. And he has deployed to Iraq and Afghanistan 4 times in support of various contingency operations. He has a bachelor's degree from Louisiana State University, master's degrees from Kansas State University and the Army Command and General Staff College, as well as one in military studies, advanced military studies from the School of Advanced Military Studies and the Joint Combined Warfighting School. So with that, Ryan.
I appreciate it, Matt, and I appreciate you guys asking me to come on and do this. And this kind of stuff is fun for me to do, just to have conversations about managing complexity and managing risk. And I understand you've got kind of a range of folks from grad school students all the way up to professors and former ambassadors. So I appreciate you guys asking me to come on. This is really an honor. So just I'll kind of frame this. So I'll kind of start with kind of who I am and why did Matt come ask me to speak. I still have to figure out why he asked me to come, but it's cool regardless. But it's kind of lay out some ground rules, talk about things I did at CENTCOM a little bit, but I know for some of the audience, I will try not to use acronyms, but if I do, just raise your hand. I'll explain what the acronym is. But talk a little bit how the joint force is structured. What does a joint staff do? When we talk about a joint staff, what does that mean? Then what my role as a planner was in that headquarters, and then just kind of what prepared me to do the job. And then I'll open it up for questions. On that regard, we can talk. I can talk some specific events that have occurred and how we built around some of those things. Obviously, some of the events we can only get into some of less of the detail. As we start talking about like current policy or future policy, is where I'm going to steer the conversation away from that because I can't get into that kind of thing. But just from terms of an introduction. I primarily, from a military standpoint, I have 4 operational deployments to the Middle East. I've gone to the Middle East a number of other times on TDYs or planning iterations with other partners. My background from a tactical side is as an infantry officer and mostly in what we call brigade and below headquarters, so about 4,000 soldiers and below. And I currently command an infantry battalion at Fort Hood. I have a lot of experience, not only in the Middle East, but I spent 15 months working Korea war plans with our partners in South Korea. So I can talk a little bit of the dynamics there and how we develop plans in a coalition environment or a combined environment. And then my last 3 years before this, as Matt alluded to, I worked at the U.S. Central Command out of Tampa, Florida. And the U.S. Central Command, for those unfamiliar with it, is responsible for the entire Middle East region. So my specialty or my focus area in there, I was a joint operations planner focused on Operation Inherent Resolve, which and then really evolved into focusing on Syria crisis planning. Contingency planning is really what I spent about the last year and a half really deep diving into. In that job, I worked with our partners in the region, so a lot of combined planning with Middle Eastern partners, with coalition partners, part of OIR. I'll get into this in a minute, but OIR is a coalition of 71 countries and 4 organizations, so a lot of competing interests. And sometimes cooperative interests in there. The other piece, I worked a lot with our allies in the region, so our NATO allies, specifically Turkey, and many of our UK partners, working options and plans inside of Syria itself. And really the 3 things that I kind of talk about is we worked campaign plans, so long-term planning. We worked a lot of crisis action planning, so an event occurs, and then we want to try to change those conditions and get us back to a favorable condition. And then I worked a number of humanitarian assistance plans, which is really when we start to pull out and a lot of the interagency folks. So that's kind of my background that I spent the last few years doing. So what is a joint staff? So a joint, so the way that our national security apparatus from a military standpoint is structured is you have the Department of Defense and you have the joint staff that those are operated out of Washington, D.C. Operational control for operations comes down from the Department of Defense, from the Secretary, to the what we call combatant commands or COCOMs. And we have geographic and functional combatant commands. For example, SOCOM, the Special Operations Command, is a functional combatant command, whereas CENTCOM, Central Command, is a geographical combatant command. So line of, chain of command, POTUS, Secretary of Defense, and then in my case, when I worked at Central Command, General Joe Votel was the CENTCOM commander. And then underneath the CENTCOM staff, the joint staff, we have joint task forces or component commands. So every military component, the Army, the Navy, the Marines, have a component command. And then the way that the military solves problems is we create a joint task force to deal with that problem. So for Operation Inherent Resolve, when President Obama and the National Security Council decided to take action in support of the government of Iraq against ISIS, they created a combined joint task force, Operation Inherent Resolve. And that combined joint task force worked for Central Command. And if that's unclear at all, I'll try to clear it up as we go. But it's taken me 18 years to figure this out. So,
hey,
so,
Ryan, can you just talk for just a minute about why we do joint operations, right? Why we talk about it in terms of joint commands, and why that's different, say, than what we did in World War II in many cases.
So one of the as we kind of came out of the World War II era, we realized that there was, and we looked, even in World War II, we did exercise a lot of joint operations, but we didn't have unified command and control. So you'd have admirals and generals competing in the Pacific over who got to do what, who dictated the pace of operations. So as we came out of that, and as we kind of evolved the force in the 1980s, there was the Goldwater-Nichols Act, which really formalized the combatant command structure. And what that did was we said, hey, all of the different services have different capabilities, but we need a way to harmonize those. We need a way to work those. So the actual chairman of the Joint Chiefs was formed post World War II. General Bradley was the first chairman of the Joint Chiefs, I believe in '48 under the National Security Act. And then we didn't really coalesce in the combatant commands or joint force headquarters, standing joint force headquarters, until the 80s. So Central, one of the reasons we do that, and part of just the nature of warfare now, is all of warfare really is inherently joint right now. Even we were always using air power, we were always using some form of ground power. Now we've moved, we've really moved into cyber. Cyber is a huge component of all operations now. So when we talk about prosecuting campaigns, really at the operational level and above, it is inherently a joint endeavor. So we organize into standing joint headquarters, and then typically what you will find is that we create a sub headquarters below that geographic command that will harmonize joint operational effects. Does that make sense, or am I using too much Army lingo?
I think we're good.
All right, I'm good. All right. So a joint staff. So if you walked into the CENTCOM headquarters today, well, maybe not today, but before COVID hit, there's about 2,500 people that work there every single day inside of a few different buildings, and they have different directorates. They have a personnel directorate, they have an intelligence directorate, with an augmentation. So intelligence at the joint level is a massive endeavor. I worked in what they call the J3, the Operations Directorate, and I worked in what's called J35, which is the Operations Plans Directorate. We have a J5, which is Plans, J6 does Commo, but really every function across the board, there's a directorate for it, usually headed by a 2-star flag officer, either an admiral or a general, and then with a supporting staff. So it's a pretty large endeavor. We've built kind of this bureaucracy to deal with the complexity of the operational environment. And some people would argue that bureaucracy slows down our decision making at times because of all of the stakeholders. If you go up a level, the joint staff is a little bit bigger than the CENTCOM staff, but they have similar functions across the board. And then if you come down to the CJTF level, CJTF OIR's manning document was substantially smaller than CENTCOM's, but that's kind of how
is Combined Joint Task Force, guys.
Yes, Combined Joint Task Force, Operation Inherent Resolve, CJTF OIR. Their headquarters was much smaller. They were much more focused on a more narrow lens, really on the defeat of the Islamic State. So that's what a joint staff does, what a J staff does, and everything we do is designed to inform the decision making of a 4-star general. In my case, it was General Joe Votel, who honestly was one of the smartest people. I'm one of the best people I've ever worked for in my career. So what did I do? What does a planner do? How did I help? In the effort. So what a planner does. In a strategic or operational headquarters. So in the joint force, we define levels of war as tactical, operational, and strategic. Strategic having broader implications, and then some people will talk about policy. So what we do in DC, what the State Department deals in most of the time, would be policy, and then the military creates strategies to achieve those political or policy objectives, and then when we actually talk about things happening in time and space, those are typically operational level things, and at tactics is individual actions that are taking place on the battlefield. But in the Army, and this is true across all services, we teach people tactics for most of their career. And then the first time you deal with anything on a strategic level is when you are actually like in the headquarters. And the difference between those two is in strategic planning, there's rarely a balanced equation at the end of it. So in tactics, if I take my battalion to go fight another battalion, at the end of that, there's only one of the two remains. I can solve for that equation. I solve for X. In strategy, it rarely ends that way. There's always an unbalanced equation. So what you're trying to do is create a better position at the end. So that's what, as a planner, that's what my constant job is to do, is to frame and reframe the environment and give the commander options for execution that he can put himself in a better position. The other thing you do is what I frame it as, you speak to the commander. So you are communicating information to him, because again, I was a major working on a 4-star headquarters, and I worked OIR all day long. I talked about ISIS 24/7. General Votel had a whole lot of other things that he was doing. So I spent a lot of time when we would meet talking to him about the information, the analysis that we had done on a specific problem set. The other thing that we would do is you speak through him. So you're giving him information that he can carry forward to DC to talk to the chairman of the Joint Chiefs, at the time General Dunford, or to talk to the Secretary of Defense and advocate for CENTCOM's strategic objectives and support of the policy objectives. And the third thing that really a planner does is you speak for the commander. So I spend a lot of time going to either leading or going to planning conferences with external agencies and the joint staff. And my job was to take General Votel's positions to those and advocate to try to gather resources or to try to get a NATO ally to get to a place we wanted them to be in an operation. So really, as a planner, you speak to, through, and for that combatant commander that you're working for. I know one of the themes of this series is managing, is executing policy in times of uncertainty or environments of uncertainty. So in the military, when we talk about uncertainty, we talk about it in risk. So we describe the uncertainty of the environment as risk that we cannot control, but we look at ways to mitigate it. So one of the key things that I would do, I spent a lot of time on, was looking at risk assessments and managing the risk for our operations. So we have some tools that help us do that. So the chairman of the Joint Chiefs publishes his risk assessment matrix and how we communicate risk. And really we talk in terms of risk to force. So the risk that our forces will take on doing an operation, or risk to mission, our ability to complete the mission that we've been given. So we would use that as a mechanism to communicate risk to and through the commander. Something we used to talk about a lot when we did a lot of the strike planning when we executed the strikes in Syria following the Assad regime's chemical strikes. We talked in terms of, we can create certainty and effects. I can tell you which buildings I can strike and what targets I can destroy, and the effect that would have on the Syrian chemical network. But what we could not accurately assess or control was the response of the adversary. And that was how we would talk about the risk in those types of operations. Then we would take his potential actions and look to see where we could mitigate or buffer the effects of those, and then communicate those to the commander. Some additional tools we used. You've heard people talk about wargaming. So we would have war games that included getting around a map, as simple as 15 people that would walk through a map drill, all the way up to computer-aided simulations that we would run, where we would put our actions, likely enemy counteractions, and then run an algorithm, and the computer would actually play the fight out for you to tell you potential outcomes, and we would assess those. We would execute what we call tabletop rehearsals, or tabletop exercises, excuse me, where we would bring all the commanders together and we would put a scenario on the table in front of them. And if you've been listening to all the coronavirus discussion, one of the things that as they transitioned between the Obama administration and the Trump administrations, they did a series of tabletop exercises talking about pandemic response based on the things that they had learned during the Ebola response. They did a series of tabletop exercises about Korea response, and those things are all out there. We do the same thing. We bring commanders in and we talk through actions and counteractions. And the last tool that we use a lot is rehearsals. We have people actually execute a full rehearsal of an operation, and we look for friction points. I'm sweaty right now because I just walked out of my squadron's combined arms rehearsal before this, and it's 110 degrees in Texas. And we identified 10 things that we need to change in our operation because we didn't account for a risk or a variable. So those are kind of tools that we use to assess risk and mitigate risk, and that's really one of the key things that a planner does. And the last thing I'll kind of say in terms of how we leverage, what a planner does for the headquarters is our job is to leverage the entire interagency team. I don't know everything. I have a kinesiology major from LSU, so it's not like I have an international relations degree at this point. So I need to go reach out to those folks and talk to them about, hey, this is what I want to do militarily. How does this impact Erdogan's political calculus inside of Turkey? And we can kind of get into that a little bit. But when I talk about leveraging the team, and I know there's some prospective folks that would like to work in the State Department here. One of the jobs you guys would potentially have is as a POLAD team on a combatant command or on a joint task force. And I would spend hours every week sitting in the POLAD's office talking to our State Department reps about the potential impacts and implications of our operations inside those countries. One of our POLADs had lived in Turkey for 6 years. So when I wanted to understand how it was going to impact Turkey's calculus, I went to Joe, and Joe would talk to me about how Erdogan got to where he was and the different people that play into his decision making. As a planner, I would reach out to all of our other interagency players. We have intelligence folks from DIA and the NSA and CIA that help us out. And the last group that I spent a lot of time reaching out to are the regional experts, the folks in the embassies overseas. General Votel would have a regional ambassadors conference once a quarter, or I think twice a year, I'm sorry. But they would all come together and share what was going on inside their individual countries. And it was remarkable the insights we would gather from them in those. And those always shaped how we thought about the execution of military operations or how we talked about partnerships. So one of the things, and I'll kind of close with this part, and I'll open it up for questions, and we can talk, whatever direction you want to take it. But one of the things Matt asked me to talk about was what prepared me to do that job. So I kind of joked, and they said in college, there was very little I did in college that prepared me to do this job. Other than like learn how to make friends and influence people, which happens a lot more than you'd think. But I was a kinesiology major in college. I absolutely was more focused on playing football and going out. So I did not get anything out of college. I will tell you though that after 2 deployments and getting blown up for reasons I didn't understand, I did become a decent student. Matt passed me gratefully on my oral comps, but I really became a student of my craft, of my profession. And so when I had the opportunity when I went to ILE, the military has what they call a professional military education. And as part of the Goldwater-Nichols Act, it established a lot of those things, the kind of the process to go through. But we have what we call intermediate level education. So I got the opportunity to go to Fort Leavenworth and spend a year in the school talking about the execution of military operations and military theory. And then I competed for it. I got selected to go to the School of Advanced Military Studies, which was really one of the most transformative experiences of my life. just with the number of the folks I got to talk to and learn from, and the impact that education had on me. It was absolutely tremendous, and that really set me in a good place to go and work for directly for a 3-star general at my next assignment. And I was really General Lanza's lead planner for all things Korea, and I just got to watch him manage the complexity of the Korean Peninsula. And I got to watch him manage relationships, so I learned a ton from him doing that on the job. And then, my opportunity to go to the U.S. Central Command again was one of those transformative experiences that I got there. I thought I really knew what I was doing, and I could structure a military operation. I could drop a bomb on a target all day long. But watching, just the experience of watching General Votel, General Brown, General Farrell, all the commander, deputy commander. General Brown's now the Chief of Staff of the Air Force, and General Farrell commands U.S. Army Central Command. But they, watching them manage complexity and manage uncertainty and manage relationships really helped me grow as a person and as an officer. The last thing I'll leave you with, and I'll open it up for any questions. General Abizaid came to SAMS when I was in school, and he talked about, ties into the preparedness. He talked about how the Army does a great job of preparing leaders for tactical situations, but all strategy is OJT, on the job training. And he was very, very right. I think that there's some things we do in PME, like SAMS, that help you. But I think all people learn how strategy works by executing, by practicing. And that's kind of what I'll offer as we kind of transition. I'll pause there and open it up for any questions after that kind of brief intro.
All right. So if you'd like to ask Ryan a question, if you could use the raise hand feature on the bottom of your screen. I already see that there are 2 questions out there. So I'm going to go ahead and start with Mike Castro. Mike, would you like to unmute yourself and ask Ryan a question?
Hey, Lieutenant Colonel. So I'm going to Korea, not this semester, but next semester as of now. I was just wondering if you could touch more upon what you guys were doing in Korea from a military planning aspect.
Sure. Yeah. So you guys just call me Ryan. You say Lieutenant Colonel Bulger. I look at my dad. And I realize I'm probably old enough to be your dad. I just don't feel like it, so I don't want to go that way. From a military standpoint, so we have a long-standing partnership with the South Koreans and an alliance with them. So we've had fluctuating numbers of troops in Korea, really since before the Korean War back in the 1950s. So we spend my planning efforts with the Koreans was really focused on the defense of South Korea. So I was based out of Joint Base Lewis McChord, which is in Seattle, Washington. And I would travel over to Korea about a week every month. And I would link in with the Korean military planners, either from their joint staff or their field armies, their third ROK Army. So what happens day to day in Korea with U.S. forces? We have a number of forces forward deployed in support of the defense. So we do joint training. So we'll go to ranges and go do live fire exercises with the Koreans. We have a number of folks that live there permanently. They're there all the time. We keep a standing joint headquarters there, commanded by a 4-star general. Right now it's General Abe Abrams that commands U.S. Forces Korea. And we are really there to support the defense of South Korea and just to continue to develop the Korean military's capacity. So you'll probably see, it depends on where you're going. If you go to Seoul, we still have a good number of folks in Seoul. Camp Humphreys is a little bit further south, but that's really our primary role over there, is to support the Korean military and then support the defense of the Korean Peninsula.
Excellent. Thank you. Excellent question, Mike. We'll go next to Paige Nisonger, another national security major.
Hi. So I'm from Tampa, so I've been to MacDill quite a few times and to Central Command because we have some family friends who work there. with various entities. Most of them have worked with the DoD or the DIA. But I have a question. I know this made Tampa news, and I know you're not in Tampa, but recently Central Command, actually last night, released an information that Iranian forces boarded a civilian tanker in international waters in the Strait of Hormuz on Wednesday. So I know you can't talk about what they're planning, or you may not even know what they're planning because you're not there. But if that was to come through and you're working on it, what are the steps you would go through as a planner when something like that occurs?
Yeah, so you're right. I don't know anything they're doing right now. I can kind of tell you what it would feel like, though. As soon as the worst part about leaving is you leave and you lose all the information. You have no idea what's actually happening anymore. So usually, whenever an event, a crisis event happens like that in the AOR, it's like going through the stages of grief. There's usually disbelief, there's anger. I can't believe this happened. Inside the command, because you know that you're about to spend 5 days locked in a room with 37 of your best friends. So typically, we would get the report, and it would come into what we call the current ops, or the JOC, the Joint Operations Center, and the JOC would get this report that this event had occurred, and this kind of stuff happened relatively all the time. It made news, but the Iranians have been doing unprofessional acts at sea for since they got boats. So that report would come into the JOC. The JOC would then notify the deputy commander for operations. So the J3 is a 2-star admiral, and then he would usually convene a small a CAT, a crisis action team. The CAT would get notified. I was not an Iran planner, so I would not have been notified on this one. So I would just watch all those guys get sucked upstairs. But you would convene the crisis action team, and they would go to a secluded area and begin looking at, so one, we try to understand the environment, understand the situation to the greatest degree possible. So really, what problem are you dealing with? Is there, and one of the things you always look at, what are the intentions of the adversary? The Iranians don't do a lot of stuff that's not on purpose. They usually are fairly deliberate in the things that they do. And there's a great documentary called The Fog of War. It was with Errol Morris and Robert McNamara. But one of the things that McNamara talks about in terms of principles is empathy and empathizing with your opponent. So we would immediately try to understand what happened. What exactly happened? What are the facts on the ground? General Votel used to say that all the time. And then we try to make sense of what just happened, or why did it happen? What are the Iranians trying to do? What is their end game? Is there an objective associated with this? So try to understand the why behind what happened. Sometimes we weren't able to get to that. The next piece is we would look at what are our facts on the ground? Where do we have crisis response forces postured across the AOR? What options do we have in terms of crisis response? And typically, what you would see, especially recently, was you would get a demand signal from the National Security Council for, we want response options. What response options are out there? So that usually worked its way down from the Joint Staff to the combatant command, and you would start to look at, these are the crisis response assets I have in theater. These are the other military assets I have out of theater that I could bring into theater, and these are the things I could do to try to create the political objective. So we look at what things can we do, and the next thing we would go back upstairs and ask to the National Security Council or to the administration is, what is it you want us to achieve? Do you want the Iranians to simply release the boat? Do you want to remove the capability that the Iranians used to seize the boat? And that intention from our side really drives what we take. That I have 25 options that I can employ in terms of military force. Okay, you only want me to get them off the boat. That takes these other 15 off the table because these 15 all have to do with destroying capacity. You just want me to get the boat back. Okay, so these 10 options are now what we're dealing with. And then we would say from these 10 options, here's a timeline associated with it. So I can do this tomorrow, but it has this much risk, or I could wait 2 weeks, generate capacity, buy down risk, and achieve the same effect. So it's, hey, what do you want? And when do you want it? And that always has a role. And then we would lay risk across all of it and say, hey, this is, you want us to destroy the entirety of the cruise missile defense network that Iran has and limit their capacity to be able to disrupt the Straits of Hormuz. Here's the strategic risk associated with that. And here's the risk to force associated with that. So that's probably what, there's 20 people in a room right now, probably just trying to figure out why the Iranians did what they did. The next part of it will be, all right, what do you want us to do about it? And that was a conversation we always had. I remember sitting in a cubicle 11:30 at night, typing up proposed national military objectives for a strike package because we got told to do something. We were trying to figure out what to do. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, my question was that, but it was also it definitely answered my question, but I was just confused because they also released a video in Central Command, at least from what I know of it living there in Tampa. They don't always, videos are released for specific reasons. So they had a specific reason that they wanted to release the video. So could that be an international, they wanted to create it to gain international support, or what are the reasons behind some of their publicity or advertising or whatever they did of this situation?
So it could be a bunch of different things there. It could be a bunch of different, it could just be we had the video and we released it. Generally speaking, it's not, but it could be a number of different reasons. Maybe we want the Iranians to know we're watching them. Maybe we want to communicate, maybe this is a communication between us and Iran, and they don't know we have this capability and we had it and we videotaped it. Maybe it's to get out in front of the Iranians' inevitable denial that they did this. So we get that. That's the first piece of information out there. Now you have the international community with the information that we're controlling. So that could be part of it. As we look at, we talk about graduated response. So we don't always start with blow up the coastal defense cruise missiles. We get, that's always on the table. Everybody likes blowing up an IADS network or something like that. But really you start with, all right, how can I convince you to stop doing what you're doing? And then work my way up to making you stop doing what you're doing. Potentially they release the video, and that's part of that graduated response option, is to show them, hey, I have the capability to do this, and I'm willing to show the rest of the world that I'm doing it, or that you're doing this. Stop doing it. So that absolutely could have been a very deliberate action by Central Command.
Yeah, that's fascinating insights.
Thank you.
Next up, poli-sci major Nick Thompson. Nick, want to unmute yourself?
Yeah, sure. All right. So one question I had, and I don't know how much you could comment on this, but I was curious as to if you had seen any great shifts or changes in the way our foes have fought us within your time of service, and what impact that has had on our ability to protect ourselves and our interests.
So I think what we've watched, and just speaking strictly, from an unclassed side, I think one thing we've watched over the last, 20 years. So I've been in the Army about 18 years. We went through kind of these waves, right? So I came in the Army right after 9/11, and the first thing I did, I graduated my basic course, and then I deployed to Iraq immediately, upon graduation for the invasion of Iraq. And then we fought that as we had always thought about fighting. So, we had done Desert Storm, and we had, so if you kind of follow the train for how Desert Storm went, and if you've studied how we planned to fight a Soviet invasion in Germany, we basically took the model for a fight in Germany and applied it to Desert Storm. So, an ally is attacked, or a partner is attacked, we gain access through another ally or partner. We build combat power in that access point. We get numerical superiority, or at least numerical parity, by establishing a defense of sorts. Then we build capacity in the other domains, such as the air domain. Now we have obviously the cyber domain. And then when we have set conditions to our satisfaction, we execute the offensive operation. If you take that model and you look, we did that exact same thing in Desert Storm, and we have taken that, and then we did it in OIF when we fought Operation Iraqi Freedom, when we invaded Iraq. That model played out both times. Our adversaries, namely peer adversaries, have watched us do that. So they have openly spent money on things to deny us those capabilities. So I talked about the cruise missile defense systems. So those are missiles that are designed to kill ships, to stop us from being able to get access to the shores. They've invested heavily in anti-aircraft and area denial systems. So we call it A2AD, anti-aircraft area denial. They want us to not be able to get air superiority in a specific area of operations. They've studied that our preferred approach is to seize a lodgment and then expand that lodgment, and then follow on to an offensive maneuver. So the Russians, the Chinese, the Iranians have invested heavily in those types of things. They have invested heavily in what you would consider, like, and I hate this term, so bear with me, but asymmetric capabilities. So they are picking at very niche capabilities that we have and trying to invest heavily in those. So cyber being one of those. The Russians invested very heavily. The Chinese have invested very heavily in cyber and AI, artificial intelligence, to try to offset our capabilities and deny us the ability of bringing where we have overmatch to bear. So if we're able to achieve air superiority in a battle space, our planes are better than their planes. Our bombs are better than their bombs. Our tanks are better than all their tanks, and our soldiers are better than their soldiers. So they want to keep us from being able to employ those, or at least mass those. So as we look at how peer adversaries have looked to change the way they fight us, they have focused very heavily on those type of systems to keep us from being able to mass a joint task force in a specific area and really force us to kind of piecemeal ourselves into the fight. The Army is and the Joint Force, honestly, is undergoing a modernization. You hear people talk about that as you kind of see budget negotiations play out from the NDAA. Those things are in there, and we're working to kind of get our forces modernized and build those capabilities on our end as well. Because after 18, 19 years of fighting terrorists, which requires a different type of intelligence apparatus, it requires a different type of operational approach than fighting a large-scale combat operation against a peer threat. So we've seen a shift on both sides. We've absolutely seen an investment and a shift on adversaries, and we've absolutely tried to counter that on our end, and it'll take us a few years, I think, to get there. But we're not that. They're still working through it as well. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, I think so. I did have a second question, if that's okay.
Go ahead.
Okay. So what would you consider to be the most important rising threats the United States might have to confront militarily in the future?
So I'm gonna chalk on that one a little bit, because that kind of gets into the policy realm. But and as we kind of get into when we talk who we would have to fight militarily in the future, honestly, it comes down to objectives. So you're going to continue to see, I think you're going to continue to see, us contested in spaces where we weren't necessarily contested before. So, the South China Sea and our competition with China for influence in the Pacific region will continue to create tension between us and China. China's One Belt One Road initiative is a long-term strategic plan that they have, and we want to maintain economic access into the Pacific. So there's going to continue to be tensions between us and there, but we have continuing very professional military dialogues between us and them. So I can tell you that neither one of us are really itching to fight the other one anytime soon. We're going to continue to have tensions with Russia with regards to their continued disruption in Europe. They're going to continue to exercise information war, things like that, influence Eastern European elections, influence Western European elections. So that tension is going to continue to be there. At the same time, they recognize that they don't benefit from an outright conflict with the United States. So I'm gonna sidestep that a little bit, and rather than talking about who's most likely, but as a planner, we spend a ton of time talking about risks of miscalculation and escalation. And I'll tell you that there's always the potential for a miscalculation and us not communicating intentions or us not understanding the adversary's intentions on a particular action. And there's a number of times when we made a decision with very little information that could have turned out very differently. So without saying there's any one, because I don't think that even anybody knows there's any one, but there's a number of places that we could see tension turn into a conflict and hopefully get back to at least a competition piece. One of the things that the Joint Force describes is the competition continuum. So the General Dunford would talk about we are constantly competing. We are constantly competing in the OE. Sometimes we're cooperating with somebody, so we can compete with Russia in one avenue, but we cooperate with Russia in Syria on certain things. But then the whole idea is that you stop it from getting to conflict. And as soon as you get to the point where you're at conflict, you try to get that back to at least competition as quickly as you can. General Vince Brooks, the former commander of U.S. forces in Korea, and honestly one of the smartest people I've ever heard talk. He talked about when military operations we talk about phase 1 through phase 5, and phase 3 is where all the fighting happens. General Brooks would talk about getting back to phase 0 as soon as possible. The goal of every military operation is to get to phase 0, get back into the non-fighting phase. So as we kind of look at the current OE and the future OE, I think you're going to continue to see competition and tension in multiple arenas, but you're also going to see people continually trying to get that back inside the box, because nobody really wants to see a full unconventional war right now. Does that answer your question as much as I can?
Absolutely. No,
Brian, if I can just jump in, one thing that I thought was really interesting I wanted to highlight is you said our sort of our peer competitors, right, or the things that people we would look out for, states we would look out for, depends on our objectives as much as anything else, as much as assuming that X state will always be an enemy. Can you say a little more about that, or?
Yeah, absolutely, and that's a great point. That they're so they're laying out. We used to joke about, I wonder what goes on at Iran CENTCOM. They have the Hezbollah, LNO, and all the other. They're planning, and they're getting pissed off because they have to do crisis response stuff. But everybody's got their set of objectives. And one of the things, going back to the point about what do we do when Iran takes a boat? We're trying to figure out what objectives they're pursuing here, and then what you look for are the places where our objectives can align to get everybody kind of back in there. But it's the point about them always being an enemy. If you look back 10 years, 15 years, we didn't look at China as a pure competitor. But as they expanded their desires, as their objectives started to overlap or contest with objectives of the United States, that's really when you saw the rhetoric and the discussion about, hey, what is the PLA actually doing here? And it's really been over the last 10 years. And you've heard the there's the book, the Thucydides trap, that they talk about, hey, are we just locked in this unavoidable approach to war with China? And I would posit that no, you're not locked into an unavoidable approach to war, because they could adjust objectives, we could adjust objectives, just depending on the administration and what's available in the OE. So yeah, I think it's how we perceive competition or competitors is 100% set off of our objectives in relation to theirs.
Thanks.
Thank you. I know Mike has to leave, so I'm going to allow him to skip a place and ask his question. So, Mike.
Sorry, I have work in a few minutes. I just wanted to take Schmidt's question and Paige's question and kind of ask you a personal one. With Schmidt, you talked about one of the biggest challenges for the military. And then with Paige, you kind of broke down your position and what military planning is. What would you say the biggest challenge for military planners like yourself would be when making an important decision?
I think the biggest thing that we, so there's two parts to that I guess I'll throw out there. The first part is trying to reconcile policy guidance with our capability. And one of the things that I think we struggle with as in a national security apparatus is framing achievable policy objectives in a way that facilitates the military planning. So sometimes you get very vague policy guidance that you then have to translate. So it's making that gap between the understanding from civilian leadership about what we can actually do, and then describing a strategic or operational approach that achieves that. So that's a challenge. And then the second piece is I talked about, we communicate uncertainty by talking about risk. It's seeing past the risk you don't understand. So we try to lay out futures, potential future outcomes of an action, but sometimes you get to a point where you can't see past, hey, I can't tell you what the Iranians are going to do if we do this. And communicating that in a way that is useful to the commander, that helps him make the decision, I think is one of the hardest things as a planner, especially at the strategic level. At a tactical level, it's pretty easy, because it's usually, you can usually do the numbers and look at the terrain and say, okay, if we do this, then we'll be able to destroy this echelon here, and then it's gonna take us a couple days to do this. And at the strategic level, because you're dealing with people making decisions for reasons you don't understand, and you can never understand, that is honestly one of the hardest things at the strategic level.
Excellent. Thank you. So up next, Jared Bowman. Jared.
Hi, Ryan. First of all, thank you for talking to us today. You talked a little bit about your time as lead planner with Central Command, and also your time in Korea. I was wondering if you could highlight a little bit on your time in Afghanistan and your role there supporting contingency operations.
So I was a company commander in Afghanistan, and so a company is I had about 150 guys that worked for me in Afghanistan. I was in the eastern part of Afghanistan, and it was back in 2010. So that was back during the surge into Afghanistan, as we were trying to create time and space for the Afghan government to kind of get their security forces on their feet. So that was my primary contribution to that. I was in a place called Paktika. I don't know if I mentioned that, but very, very violent, very, very dense area, very sympathetic to the Taliban. A lot of the ethnic Pashtuns had family that were Taliban or were Haqqani network was a big piece there. So super tactical stuff. I was executing patrols with platoons and really going and looking for training camps, rooting those things out in the mountains of Afghanistan. So not necessarily like not necessarily strategic level type planning type stuff. More walking around the ground doing that. It was an interesting deployment. It was a 9-month deployment there, and then we went to the south, in the Arghandab, and then back up to coast for a couple of months. But a very interesting tactical side. When I was at CENTCOM, when I was at CENTCOM, the Afghan desk was two desks over. I could talk a little bit about what those guys were working on, or I could tell war stories about my Afghanistan trip, but that, we can do that after if you want to do that.
Excellent. Thank you.
Thank you. Up next, our International Affairs Major, Michaela O'Shea. Michaela, you want to unmute yourself?
Hi. First, I wanted to thank you for taking time out of your day to speak with us. My question is, you mentioned how viewing situations from the perspective of others involved is a big step in problem solving and planning. Has there ever been a time where you try to look at a situation from the actor's perspective and struggled with understanding why they did what they did? And if so, how does that kind of change your next steps, like strategically planning?
So I think that happens a lot, honestly, when we're reacting to actions. So I can speak a little bit. When the Syrian regime executed the chemical strikes on their own population, one of the reasons was we spent a lot of time trying to figure out why they executed that. What were they trying to do? And really, it was don't they understand that there's going to be a response? Don't they understand there's going to be something else? And we talked a lot about, that we want to reestablish deterrence, and that was something that that the administration talked about in the press. Is like, hey, we executed these strikes to reestablish deterrence. But we, inside the OPT, as we talk about deterrence, as we talk about what is deterrence made up of, I have to remove desire or willingness, and I have to remove capability. So we would constantly talk about, am I affecting capability, or am I affecting willingness to do X, Y, or Z? And what you would find a lot is we could not, and rarely can you understand the thing that will impact their willingness. So the decision-making process to do so, and the calculus that they use, rarely can you identify that very well, or can you influence it all that well without escalating the situation to an unsustainable level. So what you see a lot of times is we focus on capability. Hey, we're going to remove specific capabilities from the battlefield to try to drive down their ability to do X, Y, and Z. So that was an example of a time where it was just, we couldn't understand why they executed what they executed, with the knowledge that there would be some sort of a follow-on response, or at least the highly likely suspicion there would be some sort of a follow-on response, especially the second time, because we had already responded once in April 2017. The other one I would offer up to you that we struggled with, and I think we continue to struggle with, is really understanding the desires, and the decision making on the Turkish government side with regards to the SDF in northern Syria, and we struggled to communicate our position effectively, and we struggled to understand just how much of an impasse that was for them, and kind of taken back to one of my points. The guy that really helped me understand President Erdogan's calculus was Joe Wyrings, was our POLAD advisor, and he had spent a lot of time there. So we spent a lot of time talking about why the Turkish government was approaching this the way that it was, and we obviously their security concerns were incredibly valid, and we respected those security concerns. But it was hard for us looking through the lens of, hey, we're all on board to destroy ISIS. Let's get after the destruction of ISIS. But without that understanding, that on the ground truth that Joe is able to bring to us from having lived in Ankara for a period of time, and having lived in Istanbul for a period of time, and having talked to both Kurds and Turks, and understanding that calculus, we would have never really been able to understand or appreciate that without his expertise. And that was, like I said, I don't think we ever fully reconciled it between the two. I think we've come to a minimal acceptable solution for all parties involved that allowed us to continue the campaign over. Oh, sorry, does that answer your question?
Yeah, definitely. Thank you.
Sounds great. Ambassador Boucher, did you have a follow-up comment or?
Yeah, I was going to ask a question that's sort of related to the one that Michaela just asked. And Lieutenant Colonel Bulger, let me say thanks for being with us. But so you make all these plans, you try to figure out what the other guys might do if you execute your plans, if you go ahead and do what you plan on doing, and then you do it and they do something different because you can't really get far enough inside their heads to figure out what they're going to do. And, we all face this in the personal life. You make your plans for the semester and then COVID comes along. How do you plan for future capabilities? So if, I'm going to work my way through this scenario and these are the things I need to do what I plan on doing. And these are the things I need to respond to what he might do. What else might I have, in reserve? What else do I have to think about? Whether it's personally like having a law degree in case you get kicked out of your job, or in the military terms, it's, do you have naval assets that don't look like they're going to be needed but might be needed? How do you plan that capabilities sort of resilience part of it?
So one of the I talked about some of the tools we use when we do the planning. So we talk about executing branch plans and sequels. So a branch plan is, hey, I've planned an operation, it's supposed to go this way. Oh, something's changed. Okay, I got to go this way now to achieve my objective. So a branch plan achieves the same objective, just in a different way. So we would always put together a number of branch plans. The sequel is really once I've achieved the objective. So if I have to seize Objective Tiger and I seize it and an opportunity presents itself, or I have catastrophic failure looming, the sequel is the thing that I do next. So what we would always do is, you plan to the objective that you've been given, and then the kind of last piece was always the kung fu stance that we'd set in. So you do the thing, and then it's okay, hey, how do I set the deck for the response? So we would anticipate a series of responses or some actions on their part. That is not just in a physical sense, that's also, messaging standpoint. So we would have, sometimes it was the president would come out and give a speech. Sometimes it was the Secretary of Defense. Sometimes we had all of them come out and immediately message what we just did so that the adversary completely understood what we did, why we did it, how we were able to do, some of it. And this is what, and then we would posture ourselves for any sort of response from an information standpoint, from a physical standpoint on their end. And then we would have a sequel built to do that. So whether it's you set force protection posture levels for a certain period of time, or whether like to your point, like we reposition, we ask for part of a carrier strike group to redeploy to the CENTCOM AOR, or we put all of the planes from AFCENT up flying at one time so that we can be prepared to respond, or at least they're away from where we might anticipate a retaliatory strike. I was not in CENTCOM at the time, but I can imagine when we executed the strike on Soleimani in January, that CJTFOIR and CENTCOM had repositioned their force protection assets with the idea that there would be a eventual response to the action, and then prepared probably had a series of plans to respond if response was required. So that's always part of the planning process. We often, I would say that we oftentimes are pretty close on the responses we anticipate. Every now and then we get surprised, but we try to account for as many variables as we can. I think that's, to my earlier point, that's probably the hardest part is accounting for as many variables, or at least laying it out in terms of probability and impact. So if something is highly probable but low impact, you may not do as much against it, but something that's low probability of massive impact, maybe that's a different risk level. What you're looking for is those things in the middle. It's like, hey, pretty highly probable, also pretty significant impact. Now we need to posture ourselves to deal with that. Does that answer your question, sir?
Yeah, thank you.
Okay.
All right. So we'll go back to Paige. Paige?
Hi, I have two separate questions that aren't entirely related. But I wanted to ask
You gotta ask one at a time.
Oh, yeah, there'll be one at a time. Absolutely. So in regards to intelligence, you use a lot of intelligence to guide your policy and your decision making that you used on an operations side. So in your perspective, what was the most important intelligence you dealt with? Was it military intelligence or human intelligence that you received from various partners, or MASSINIT, or communications intelligence? Like, what do you think was the most important, and how did those intelligence different forms that you could receive, how did those guide you in your decision-making process?
So one thing I think the intelligence community does a great job of, and I don't know if this was this way prior to 9/11, but I know they've made reforms since 9/11 to address this, but the intelligence community is incredibly well networked. They do an amazing job of sharing things, whether it's SIGINT, signals intelligence, whether it's imagery intelligence, where they take pictures and you see the movies with the guys like looking through the telescope, looking at a map. That happens. But they do an amazing job of sharing and kind of leveling bubbles. Now they may have different assessments, and that's really where you get competition. Is the DIA assessment is this. CIA has their own angle they're coming at it. We also have a great intelligence sharing network across our allies. So the Israelis collect intelligence in very different ways than we do, and they're very good at it. The Brits collect intelligence in very different ways, and they're very good at it. So all of those things help kind of build the picture. So I wouldn't say there's never any single int. There's a guy I knew, he say, I want all the ints, but there's never any single one. And what General Karen Gibson was our J2 when I was there, and what her team did was an amazing job of taking all of those different injects, and they have their own what they call a combined operational intelligence, the COIC, I think is what they call it. But they would bring all that stuff together, and their planners would get together and paint a full picture of what was going on, so that when they walked in to the commander, they would be able to lay out, hey, here's what this looks like on the ground. Our assessment is it's this type of missile. We have SIGINT intercepts that confirm that they moved this type of thing here. We have human intelligence that talks about moving trucks, moving these things, which are precursors to this type of weapon. And they bring all that stuff in to give him as good an assessment as he could get on, hey, we think this weapon system is here with this type capability. So there's really, whenever you're dealing with intelligence, especially at the strategic or operational level, I think there's not any one that's the most important. At the tactical level, like I always appreciated HUMINT more than anything else. When I was a company commander, I would get good human sources because I would want to understand the environment as best I could, and those helped me do it the best. But I think at the combatant command or the 4-star level that they're operating at, it really requires the whole network to bring everything together.
Thank you. And then my next question is, I know operationally you would plan, normally you would work on a more tactical level. At least that's what I've gained from listening to you. You worked in a more tactical manner. But I know that currently a lot of governments and also militaries and various entities within the United States are using misinformation campaigns as an operational tool for warfare and for various foreign policy objectives. Did you ever have any experience in using misinformation campaigns? And if you did, what was the role it played in the larger goal that you had, or the larger question that they asked?
Sorry, I was getting a text message from my sergeant major. He's beating me up right now. So information is, one of the variables we account for when prosecuting operations. So now those authorities are usually really restrictive in terms of when you're allowed to use misinformation or when you use what they call information operations. So when we talk about warfare at the joint level, you're granted certain authorities from the administration, from the Joint Staff, from the Department of Defense to let you do X, Y, and Z. And some authorities are only held at the presidential level. So only he has that decision-making authority. And you have to go say, hey, we want to do X, and we need your permission to do it. So it really depends on the authorities that you're granted. Part of information, part of even planning tactical or strategic operations, you absolutely account for the information environment and how you can shape the operation, the information environment, either with getting the accurate story out right away or through trying to deceive the adversary. So I can't talk about specific times that we did it, but yes, that is a standard data. We will do that in every single operation, always oriented on the opponent, in terms of, again, trying to inform or trying to deceive. That happens in every operation.
I know because where you worked currently, China in Africa is doing a lot of information campaigns, not necessarily all misinformation, but just information campaigns as a whole. But then also across the Middle East, Russia and China have major stakes there, and so they're conducting them. And then also some on US soil as well. But when you conduct an information campaign or you do something like that, is your goal to change the local opinion, or is it to do something more at a governmental objective? Is your goal more towards the people in the community or to the people in charge?
So I'm going to give you the standard government answer of it depends, because it does. It absolutely depends, because sometimes you're maybe I want to get a message to the operator of the air defense missile systems that I don't want, that I want to stop him from using that system, because if he does, X, Y, and Z is going to happen to him. That might be an information focus like on that individual or that apparatus. Or, in the case of Desert Storm, they dropped leaflets on the Iraqi troops that had been sitting there getting bombed for months and months, and they got 100,000 of those to surrender. So that was an audience that was targeted in that case. So we absolutely would use information and information delivery mechanisms to influence governments, as well as to inform or influence their constituents. To shape the military operation or shape the information environment to our advantage.
Thank you so much for giving us your time. Apologize to your sergeant major for us. We will give you back to him, and thank you for his permission to appear. Again, just appreciate the time, and hopefully we can stay in touch with some of the students maybe later on. If they have some questions, I'll funnel them your way.
Thank you so much, Ryan. We really appreciate it. I just want to make one last announcement about our next talk, which is Ambassador Pamela Spratlin. Her event is on September 10th at 4 p.m. It's a Thursday again, and would appreciate if you all could make that event as well. Should be just as exciting and interesting and fascinating, really, as this one. It was really eye-opening for me, so really appreciate it, Ryan. Thank you. Richard or Carolyn?
I think you said it all. Fantastic, Ryan. Thank you so much. Really, really interesting talk and great questions from the students. Everyone stay well.
Same here. Thanks an awful lot. The military probably does more planning than any other part of the government, does it more thoroughly and carefully than any part of the government, and has to deal with a lot of weird, unusual, unforeseen contingencies more than any part of the government. You can predict everything about the future except what's actually going to happen. And I think the process of planning is part of that, being able to deal with things. You've thought it through once, you can think it through again and again and again and again. And when it actually happens, you've got in your brain all the things you need to think about. So thanks for walking us through this so carefully, so much detail. The questions you ask, what was he thinking kind of questions are just amazing. And I think we can apply them in a whole lot of different situations. So really appreciate it. And on to the next.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Thank you so much.